Happy Wellness Wednesday, everyone. Today, my special guest is Stefano Di Bella, a friend of mine and a Live Alternate ambassador. We're going to get to know Stefano today. So, Stefano, thanks for jumping on this call with me. And how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Good to see you. I miss you, man. I know I moved from South Florida recently, so um, it's great to be on
Yeah,
here and great to talk to you after a little while. I think the last time we hung out was like the beginning of December, so good to be
yeah.
back.
Remind everyone where you moved to, because you have
Yeah,
a
so
beautiful landscape in the background.
that's funny. Yeah, so I moved to the Tampa Bay area from the Miami Fort Lauderdale area. I was basically living in Fort Lauderdale for the past 3 years. I moved here to be closer to family and just had a better work situation, uh, life situation in general. So yeah, good to see you, man.
Awesome. Well, my guest today for everyone is Stefano, and on Instagram you can find him at Stefano Has Your Back. And he is a health-focused engineer who's focused on a non-toxic lifestyle, a positive mindset, connecting the dots, maximizing his quality of life. I follow him on Instagram, and he's been my friend for the last year, and I've learned a lot of nutritional advice from him. He goes really deep. He's a scientist. That's what I love, to speak in science with him and going deep on food, debunking a lot of things, but also just, not having biases, really approaching things from more of a engineer background, which is great, breaking things down. And we're going to get into that today. But first, I want to start off with, what got you started on your wellness journey? And what are your favorite childhood memories of wellness? Because I think it often starts in youth, but maybe not.
Yeah, so it didn't really start in youth. I haven't always been this way. Um, my but looking back to my youth has given me a lot of clues for how to move forward. So I started off, I was a very like emotional kid, and I had I had a lot of anxiety at a very early age. So that's why I say, looking back, I've learned a lot from that, because I think the main lesson that I've learned throughout my life is that the relationship that we have to health, the relationship that we have to food, and our environment is the first step in getting healthier. Um, so it was very, I used to have like a lot of stomach aches, for instance, and I would get nauseous over just feeling anxious about basically nothing. It was just me adapting to the human experience as a young kid. So I would get stressed out about school, like school assignments, things like that. But they actually
Yeah.
translated very early on to things like nausea. I was, and I
Wow.
didn't, I also kind of, I wouldn't call it a phobia, but I was definitely, I had issues with like the whole idea of throwing up. So whenever I would get nauseous and feel that way, I just, I would kind of get like really, really upset. And so that was
Wow.
those were the beginnings of my health journey. But it wasn't until I got into college, or right before college, that I started to deal with more problems as a result of taking pharmaceuticals. And that was really the beginning of doing something about it. So um, now this isn't going to be a conversation about how bad pharmaceuticals are for you or anything like that. I mean,
No.
we've done a really amazing job as human beings to establish technologies to improve our situation, especially improve it in a very acute form. So getting a really quick result out of like a particular pill or whatnot. But the results that I was seeking was to eliminate acne. So I had pretty bad acne as let's see, when did my acne start? I'd say like from 13 to 16 was the really heavy years of having acne. And I had it really bad. So
Wow.
I would have
You
really
can't
big
even tell by
pimples.
looking at you.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks.
I
Well,
mean, your
and if
skin
you,
looks great,
thank you, man. And
but I think a lot of teenagers struggle with this. So I'm glad we're talking about acne. I had acne too as a teenager. And I also had a lot of stomach issues. That's why I was nodding my head so much. I had a lot of stomach issues growing up.
yeah,
Stress, anxiety. It's a common story, bullying. Stomach gets tore up. I didn't have the nausea issue, but I had hospitalization too. So I'm excited to get into
absolutely.
gut health with you. Yes, you were saying your acne, you were taking medications.
Yeah, and you and I can definitely relate. Like, we're both very energetic people. So if we don't, like, even without any single supplement, right? You and I can get up in the morning, first thing in the morning, and be pretty full of energy, just a
Yep.
glass of water and we're ready to go. Right. And
Yep.
so, so anyway, so yeah, so when it comes to acne, I had it so bad that my parents, uh, took me to a dermatologist just because it was very uncomfortable. I have a lot of scarring, so it might not be visible with my laptop camera, but if you saw me in person, you'd be able to see certain areas where I have scarring from acne, because I used to pick at it. It was itchy, it was uncomfortable, and uh, I grew up in a household where my parents did their best, but they didn't follow a holistic lifestyle. It's
Yeah.
not their fault. Actually, I
No.
have conversations with a lot of people of my generation and maybe even the younger generation, and it was all the same thing. We grew up eating, in my family, I consider myself fortunate. We ate a lot of home cooked meals, but still we ate a lot of garbage. We ate a lot of, frozen pizzas, and we definitely didn't think, oh, we should eat this way for our health on a consistent basis. That was never a conversation at home. So uh, anyway, so my first approach in dealing with it, was my mom would buy me off the shelf facial cleansers, and we would try to do it from a skin perspective, like an external perspective, right? So after all that stuff didn't work, like I would even do what was that famous cleanser? It was called. It came like
Clearasil?
in a little. No, it came like in a
Or
little three
Cetaphil?
pack. No, I used Cetaphil. That was a good one actually.
Yeah.
But
Those are the ones I've heard of. Yeah.
no, there was one that somebody recommended to me, and what would end up happening was I would apply whatever product it was. It would work for a week, and then after a
Salicylic
while,
acid, probably. Was it a
yeah, something
salicylic
was
acid? Yeah.
exactly, yeah, something with those kind of compounds in it. Man, I'm racking my brain for the name of it, but it was a really, really
Mm.
popular one, and other kids at school would recommend it to me, and like I said, it only worked for a short amount of time, and not to mention it was expensive, right? So
Mm.
fast forward to the dermatologist appointment, and the dermatologist, without even trying anything else, recommended something called Accutane. And so I
Sure.
started. So we, the first appointment, he gave us a very quick spiel about it. This was, your typical allopathic dermatologist. So it was a probably 10-minute max face-to-face conversation. Hey, I recommend Accutane. You're going to need to get blood tests for it. Go ahead and go home and think about it, and let me know. Goodbye. That's how it was. You're going to be fine. So I wanted to take it just because I heard it was just the most effective treatment for acne. So I had to get regular blood tests every month. They test your blood mainly for the triglyceride levels, because and a medication like that can really affect your liver, and so you don't want to have any adverse events. So they would check the blood every week, and first few months it was great. My skin would dry out a little bit, etc. But then I started having serious stomach problems. So the stomach problems came back, and it wasn't necessarily because of all of the stress or anything like that. It was an actual physical sensation. And so
Okay.
so it got to the point where my stomach was so bad that I couldn't eat. And actually even putting a t-shirt on would like exacerbate the pain. It felt hard to just have a t-shirt on. And I
Was it
remember there were,
the lining of the stomach, or the conditions? Like probably both, but I know with the
yeah,
lining,
it
it's very
actually,
sensitive. Like movement could make the lining hurts versus food could also make the lining. Like orange juice could trigger, obviously,
yeah,
sour
yeah,
stomach.
exactly. Well, and you got to remember this. I was also eating whatever I wanted to. Like there was no
Mm.
such thing as
No
healthy
holistic
food.
approach back then. Yeah.
Yeah, and even the food that was considered healthy, in hindsight, was the wrong approach. Um, and
Yep.
so yeah, like having a t-shirt on hurt, and I was in really, really bad pain. Sometimes I would finish eating and I felt like a really serious urge to throw up. And so anyway, I ended up going to a gastroenterologist, and they asked me a few questions, and it ended up becoming, they ended up determining that I was actually, they were asking me when I was taking the pill, and I had to take it twice a day. So I would take it during the day, and then I would also take it at night before going to bed. So the issue became that that pill wasn't settling in my stomach. It didn't fully dissolve. So the
Okay.
compounds within the pill were actually burning
Oh, wow.
um, the the stomach in general, but especially the area where so since I was laying down, it's that uh, the area where your esophagus makes a
Hmm.
connection to your stomach. There's a
Okay.
little, like what they call a sphincter there. It's a little muscle that
Sure.
opens and closes when you swallow, and there's like a little flap there that protects your esophageal lining from the stomach acid, because the stomach lining can handle the hydrochloric acid and the pepsin, all that kind of stuff,
Sure.
but your esophagus can't. It doesn't have the same lining, and so
And back to throwing up, that's where it comes up.
exactly. So that was
Yeah.
there were a lot of lessons in that. Definitely the timing of eating. I would eat, we would, as a family, since we're kind of like of more European influence and like heritage,
Hmm.
we would eat pretty late. So it's very common, like in European cities, to
Sure.
see people eating dinner at like
Spanish
9 p.m.
culture. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
100%.
And so anyway, so that was the start of it, because that was my first
Hmm.
really big health scare. Like my first like
Okay.
really big one, where I was like, wow, like, I started to make the connections that what I
Did
was
you?
eating would have
Yeah. There you go.
an
You started
effect.
to put together like diet. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
I think right around that age, a late adolescence, when kids start to, leave their parents' home, they start to, wake up a little bit to the fact that, and some people do it for a while. Some people never really look into it. But so you started as a late teenager, kind of
Yeah.
studying, you would say, like health. Okay.
Yeah. So that health scare that I told you about was
Yeah.
at 17.
Okay.
And so anyway, after that, I made a very quick decision to stop taking the medication, because clearly
Okay.
it was so powerful that not only, so the stomach issue was probably the worst part, but I started having issues because it dried my body out so much. And
Hmm.
I didn't have the mentality to be on top of my health like I am now. So I wasn't like, really on top of hydrating. I didn't carry a water bottle around. Like all of that stuff was out of whack,
Sure.
and I wasn't
That
paying
would have helped a
attention
lot
to
if
it.
you were probably, yeah. But
Yeah.
I've also heard psychologically, does it create any issues sometimes? Or is that just linked into, there were some issues with side effects
Yeah. So
of
some of
mood
the
disorders?
That's
Yeah.
right. So there were mood disorders as a result, but honestly, what I experienced mood wise when I was younger, like with anxiety, was
Hmm.
was way worse. So that
Okay.
wasn't an issue
So
for
you could
me.
handle that. You could handle it. Okay.
Yeah, but one thing
Yeah.
is that the dryness was so intense that I had trouble like urinating. Like I had
Oh,
trouble going to
wow.
the bathroom. Like my bladder was kind of out of whack. So it felt like I had like blockages there. Like my urine, sorry to get so graphic, but like my urine wasn't flowing naturally. And as after urinating, I didn't feel the same kind of relief, because it felt like my bladder was tense. I guess that's the best way to
Mm,
describe it. And so
really
anyway,
uncomfortable. Yeah.
right. So that's where it started. So one
Yeah.
thing that I don't talk about as much nowadays is that I'm also a musician. So I'm an educated musician. I spent the first part of my like young adult career pursuing music, and so I did band and stuff in high school, and then
I know you
I
as a
got a music,
DJ and producer.
right,
I
and
mean,
I also
I've
play
seen
the
some of your
saxophone.
mixes. Okay. And the saxophone. Yep.
Yeah,
So
and
that's all
so
started, yeah, early on too,
yeah, and that's so
in high
that's a
school.
really that's a really big part of my life. And but even though I don't talk about it as much, but the reason I'm telling you that is that I met a very important person when I was basically a freshman at I went to UNF. So I moved from the Tampa Bay area. I grew up here, and I moved to Jacksonville, and I started studying music, jazz studies. So I was playing the saxophone, and
Love jazz.
that
I
was
played the trumpet.
yeah, and that's what I was into at the time. I took it very seriously, and I was very involved in band and all those kind of things, and a lot of different music programs. That's really what I focused on. Even though I played a little bit of sports too, but music was the main focus. And my freshman year, one of the professors at the school was a touring musician. Her name's Lynn Ariel, and she was really the first person that I met that was that lived a very holistic life. But she was one of the holistic types that paid attention to everything. This is the first time I'd ever heard of anybody talking about, not wanting to microwave their food. She would be at a restaurant, and she would ask them what all of the ingredients they were using to cook and how they were cooking the particular dish. one of those. And those people become this caricature that gets made fun of, right? I don't know if you've seen the show Portlandia, but there's actually a really, really
No,
great
but I've heard of it.
it's great. And they bring humor into that, because it's based in Portland, and Portland is known for being a very like health conscious city, or at least having a very health conscious population.
Hipster.
Yeah, exactly. And so anyway, so she was that character, that archetype, that personality. And I worked very closely with her because I I
Sorry
was a
about that.
scholarship. Oh, no problem. I was a scholarship recipient, and I was very involved in the music program. And so I got to work closely with her on her projects, just because I was one of the top students, and I always tried to create more opportunities for myself in terms of playing professionally, and she was a professional touring musician, so it was so great to work with her
So she was
because
mentoring you, yeah.
yeah, she was mentoring
She
me,
took you
and
privately, yeah.
she took her job very seriously as a teacher. But what was cool is that she was touring the world, playing, as a recording artist, and also just as a performer. She was a piano player, and she would be recording albums on like major jazz labels and all that type of stuff. And she would get off the plane from Europe and still come and uh, teach, for instance, like a small group, like a small ensemble, to like playing jazz tunes like at 9 in the morning. Like that's the kind of person she was. She was very dedicated. And so I used to, as a result of working closely with her, she would invite me to her house to help her basically put together the manuscripts, like the sheet music, because I had there's a computer program called Finale. It must still exist, and that's how you can actually generate sheet music. And I was good at using that program, and she was not very technologically advanced. Like this lady would she had like a little kitchen timer, and she would set the kitchen timer for 10-minute increments throughout the entire day, working on
Wow.
very particular like hand motions for the piano. She was so devoted to her craft. I mean, she was definitely one of my first more serious mentors. Like at me as a young adult, finally starting to really learn what it means to play music at a serious level. And I would watch this lady, and not only that, she was so serious that she would shut the door. I would be in the other room working on putting together music for her album, and she would shut the door and say, look, I don't want to be rude, but like, no disturbances, just wait till I come out if you have any questions, and if you need to leave, just leave what you finished like on the table and just let yourself out. That's how serious she was. And
I love that.
she's a great human being.
Mindfulness and focus. That's what I truly believe are very strong suits
Yeah,
of
exactly.
Character, is to be very mindful, which is checking in. And as a runner or as a health person, you got to check in with your body. And focus is so important in this day and age, turning the phone off. That's awesome. And she was doing it probably before that age of modern distractions. But
absolutely,
well, that's really cool. So as a musician, you've gotten to get into health. Now that took you, I know, to become a health coach as well as an engineer. Which one came first? Did you go to school to become an engineer and then you became a health coach?
Yeah, so engineering came first, and engineering came as a result of spending time out on the road and having so much time to think on all these different flights, going to different cities to play. And and I just started asking why. Why is really the basis of curiosity, right? And so I would be on the airplane, and I'd watch the wing just like wiggling around. I'm just like, wow, how does that not just like break off, right? We're going at these ridiculous speeds. I started asking really basic, almost childlike questions, right? And then I got really sick of just the musician life, because playing shows, even though it may seem like a lot of fun all the time, my job was to, like, I would be working when everybody else was having fun. And it kind of created some issues in my life, just because my family would go on trips and I wouldn't be able to go because I'd be traveling, and it just got old really quick. So I toured. I did like professional tours with like a major label artist
it's a hard
for
lifestyle.
a couple of years.
Yeah,
It's a tough lifestyle.
Couple of years, yeah.
And there's a lot of there's just kind of like a lot of partying, and it's all centered around
not
that.
As healthy.
It's not as healthy. Like, there are people that
having your own garden.
Yeah, exactly. And there are people that
you don't have a garden when you're touring.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and there are people that do that. There are people that lead a health conscious life, and they do, that's all they know how to do, they're healthy, but they play music, and that is their preferred lifestyle, and I totally respect that. And even somebody like you DJ, and you still work for Live Ultimate, and that's great. And so, but I wanted to take more time to create music for myself as opposed to just being a band member, because that's what
Sure.
being a saxophone player was. Like, I was in a horn section, and we would play
Mm-hmm.
mainly like R&B music, and then I would also play in like hip hop groups and reggae bands, that kind of stuff. That's the music that I prefer. And so I got sick of all that, went to school for engineering, and then
What type of
I'd
engineering
always
did you end up specializing in?
I did
I know there's a lot of
electrical
different types.
engineering. Yeah,
Electrical. Okay,
it's
cool.
electrical engineering, and even though there are a lot of different types, there are basically a few main categories, and then anything else is just kind of like a subcategory of the main category. So you have like civil, electrical, mechanical, chemical, and industrial, I would say. And then there's the whole computer.
Where did you go to college?
So I ended up going back to the same school where I studied music to study engineering, and
Okay.
I graduated 5 years later. I was initially like a mechanical engineering student. It took me a little longer to graduate because I switched my major to electrical. And
Okay.
just because of all the different audio applications, I started to get really excited about that, the idea of like designing synthesizers and all that. And then,
Cool.
but, throughout school, I realized that, I don't know, I think I kind of got into the mindset, which universities are notorious for, is that they have like they have their own departments where they get you a job, and so it was all centered around getting a job. And so getting a job became more important than the subject matter after a while, because when that type of schooling is very intense. Like they throw you a lot of different topics all at once, right? And your job is more of just time management and getting to the point of what you need to know for the exams. And I'm definitely
Being a good
very
test
thankful.
taker, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's what
so
the
it's
modern day academics is all about.
exactly. And
Unless
I
you're in
kind
an interdisciplinary field like engineering, I feel like you have some opportunities, but botany a little different.
yeah. Oh, it's very, very broad
Botany, you
for
still have to be able to
engineering.
pass a test too, but there's a field, there's a lab. Is there a lab in engineering?
Yeah, you do.
Is it,
You do
yeah,
various
you do a
labs.
lot of labs.
And so anyway, and while I was studying, I reconnected with one of the bands that I played locally with, and it's a band called Split Tone, and we played a lot of reggae and hip hop music, and I had a lot of fun
Cool.
doing that. So like my part-time job in school was playing music, and that was it was very rewarding. But then it kind of created this conflicted mentality that I had, where I loved playing music so much. So school started to seem like a little pointless, like certain classes that I was taking. And
Sure.
so, and throughout that whole process, what I was really, really interested in getting deep into was actually health,
Okay.
because as a result of school being more stressful and having lots of different tasks and lots of different subjects to stay on top of, and these are, these are more complex subjects. This is, the world of that's very heavy in mathematics and physics. So you really can't go deep enough when you're in those classes, and even in the real world. I mean, these are very expansive topics. So I I became very, very strict about meal prepping, and focusing on how to improve my health, because of the fact that around that time I started getting sick regularly again, and that was another signal for me um, to figure out what to do, to try and come up with a solution on my own, because I had enough knowledge to appreciate holistic health, and avoiding your typical medical interventions, like any kind of pharmaceutical intervention, because of the fact that I would go to the doctor. You might not be able to hear it, but I still have sinus issues,
I
and
do too, actually. So you can hear it in me once in a while too.
yeah. So
I have a
here's
lot of sinus issues, but I'm
yeah.
getting
So
through them. As a kid, I was way worse. Sinus, stomach. We had a lot of alignments actually in our issues.
definitely we do,
Yeah.
yeah. And
So
so
yeah.
so here's the thing. I would go to the doctor. I had this great doctor. She was the sweetest little Indian lady. She was so nice. And but that was the thing. I would go to the doctor's office. I would get around that time. I think it's definitely partly due to the stress, but also the way I was taking care of myself. Around that time, I would get like for 3 years in a row, I had an average of 5 sinus infections a year, just definitely from, like I said, the way I was taking care of myself. And then on top of that, just, I think the stress of school and just not knowing how to manage that. So I would get these really bad sinus infections where I was in bed with like fevers and stuff for like a day or two. And then
Wow.
I would miss class and all that type of stuff. So if we want to talk about like the first thing that I saw to be really, really effective, it was oregano oil. Somebody had told me,
Okay.
listen, try out oregano oil, but make sure that it's wild harvested. It's called like P73 oregano oil. And I remember having that same onset of like inflammation, like all that swelling in my sinuses and getting the headache and feeling like, oh, tomorrow I'm going to wake up and have a very scratchy throat. It feels like a scratchy throat, but it's essentially the sinus cavity that's happening to.
Mm-hmm.
So
The
I tried.
dripping. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So I took an entire dropper full of oregano oil that night.
Okay.
And the next day I woke
Internally
up.
now, because a lot of oils are external and some are internal. So
Yeah, exactly.
you
No,
took it
and
internally
I took it
in like
internally.
water.
Oregano, yeah, not even in water. I mean, like I was
Okay.
intense enough at that point, especially having the experience of those symptoms, that I was like, I don't even
Okay.
care what this is going
But
to be
did you
like. So
research? Because like I know this whole story, you're a student in whatever you do. So that student aspect in engineering and music, I'm sure that translated to health. And did you read your labels? Did you do your research? Definitely read your labels, guys,
yeah,
um,
so yeah,
before you put
absolutely.
anything in and on your body.
So
Yeah.
I had read the label, and I knew that I could take, I knew enough, and this is just very basic, the very basics of me starting to research what I was taking. So
Okay.
I knew enough that I could take a dropper full, it wasn't going to do any bad. And I
Okay.
knew enough to know that I wasn't supposed to take a dropper full every day for a long period of time. And I
Okay.
think these are the misconceptions sometimes when people, um, they know that there's a good herbal supplement out there or some kind of more holistic intervention. They just kind of write it off as being okay to just take in massive amounts, and
Sure.
they can run into a lot of
Like
issues. So
vitamin
that's,
C,
I would
people
never.
are like, oh, I can just start
Yeah.
gobbling it. But yeah, that's not the case.
Right.
And you always
Right.
have to do your research. Always. Never take
Yeah.
anyone's
Yeah.
word for it. Do your own research. It's available.
Right.
Just got
Right.
to go and look.
Right.
Yeah.
And but see, the cool thing is that I was also very much willing to experiment. And I think a lot of people have found themselves in this scenario where they like the symptoms of what I was experiencing with the sinus infections were so shitty that I didn't care. Like if I had an adverse reaction, then cool, I would have dealt with it. But I didn't care. So I didn't study this as much as I would have now. Right. Knowing what I know now, I would have been more careful. But at the same time, I did it in moderation. But what was so cool is that one dropper full of oregano oil the next day started to make my symptoms regress. Like they were actually getting better. And so I'd say that was the first time that I experienced like the power of a more holistic intervention,
Herbal,
as opposed.
herbal
Yeah.
medicine. Yeah.
Well, and what I was trying to say about the
Natural
doctor.
cures.
Yeah, what I was trying to say about the doctor is I would go to the doctor and I would ask her the same questions. I would say,
Mm-hmm.
look, how can I avoid taking something like a pharmaceutical? Just because
Sure.
she recommended
Side effects.
Zyrtec. Yeah, she
Yeah.
recommended Zyrtec because she said, oh, well, based on
Oh,
the
wow. Yeah.
inflammation and the redness that you have there,
It's like an
it might be
allergy. Yeah.
it might be an allergic reaction,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so and it just wasn't. And I said, look, I'm
No.
taking it, it's not doing anything, I'm still having the same issues. And when I would
Yeah.
ask her these more direct questions, like help me pick out what to eat, help
Sure.
me um
Yeah.
yeah, help like what, I mean,
Preventative advice,
give me
also
some preventative
dietary,
advice.
lifestyle. Yeah. I
Exactly.
mean, we have to take a little pause here because I don't know if you know, but I think you know, and a lot of people know, my mom was a pharmacist for 35 years. So I literally digested every single thing she brought home from all these conferences, all the little magnets and the little trinkets they give you. And I was working next to her, going to work with her in the hospital on bring your, I just go in there once a month, a couple times a month. And yet I didn't, get given a ton of pharmaceuticals in my life, just here and there. And thankfully, had a good family that was eating healthy food and, was able to, I think, realize that there's a need for certain pharmaceuticals in, life-saving or whatever, even just like you need it for an acute symptom right then, but for chronic symptoms, I just believe that you can work on even with acute. Now we know that, 99% of, well, pharmaceuticals are mainly plant-based in general. There are some synthetically created ones, but a lot of them, I think, I forgot the stats, but it's like 70% of them are originally from a plant isolation. And pharmaceutical, I think that they're starting to become more mindful. At least there's mindful pharmacists, but what you were talking about is really important because some people label it just all as evil, like Monsanto, pharmacy, it's all connected, evil empire. And it's not the truth. My mom was an amazing pharmacist for 35 years, and my older brother was an organic farmer. I was in between two worlds. And you saw too that, but did you find that they had any good advice for you, this pharmacist in particular, or was it that you had to go and do all the work on your own?
I had to do all the work on my own. Actually, when I would, so like I told you, the doctor was a very, very nice lady. But
yeah,
when I would ask those very direct questions, she would just kind of, like try, that face that people make when they're like, oh, I'm sorry. She showed sympathy, and she said, well, no, there's nothing I can think of, and
even dairy shouldn't even recommend any dietary, huh? Because we know inflammatory foods will cause mucus or irritation.
Right. So I come to learn later on that, medical doctors of the allopathic paradigm are not really trained in nutrition. And so, so we have this kind of more reductionist mentality, or we see that with doctors. So everybody specializes in something, right? So this one's like the family practice, and then you have the dietitian, and then you have, the gastroenterologist, and you have all these people. So they're taught, I believe, to operate within their own knowledge, which I think is fair. But unfortunately, that kind of for a patient, right? I almost said customer, which is kind of, it applies too. But for the patient, now you get this confusion because you go to your primary doctor, and then your doctor sends you to this person, and then that person sends you to this person. And then, in a lot of cases that I've heard now, people don't get a straight answer from any one of them, because any one of them are only taught to, look at the particular system in which they specialize. But as we all know, or as we should know at this point, we're smart enough, our body is this interconnected system. And so that's when I started to look for a more functional medicine practitioner, integrative, medicine doctors. And I took to the internet, because we all know that that's very expensive. I couldn't afford as a student to pay $500 out of pocket for the first visit for a functional medicine doctor, because that's the thing, the medical system in general, it costs tons of money to deal with. And so a lot of people, that's why you see a lot of people taking matters into their own hands, because it's because they can't afford it, And so that's why I'm very thankful for the expansive internet, because through podcasts now, we can listen to real doctors talking about stuff to give us a first point of reference in order to start our investigation in whatever issue that we want to have. Now, I'm not saying don't go to the doctor, but what's cool is that we can be empowered as individuals to seek out the information that we need if we can't afford to pay for the treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. You can go on YouTube and search, okay, gastritis or ulcer, natural, solution. You're going to find doctors that, I know I was watching a podcast yesterday by Dr. Andrew Huberman, and really fascinating about the brain.
Great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Huberman Lab.
Well, that's yeah. So, we just talked about a couple of health, scares that kind of woke you up to, needing to, look into your diet and your lifestyle and how everything's interconnected. As an engineer, I'm sure that was all very logical to you. So you decided to become a health coach. Tell us about like how you got certified, with a school, what it's called, your exact title, and when that, started. Recently, I'm assuming, because also, how old are you? Just give us a little bit of background on when this all kind of happened after college, and you became a health coach now.
Yeah, absolutely. So once I got a job out of school, I moved to South Florida. So that's what brought me to South Florida, which is great because that's how you and I know each other, right? And so, and in South Florida, that was really when I started to, get deeper into, I had more time. So I started to get deeper into what was available what accounts were available on Instagram, started following doctors, and what accounts were available, or what kind of podcasts were available to listen to. And, one thing always points to the other. So like through Instagram, I got to know, for instance, like Dr. G's podcast, right? Dr. Christian Gonzalez, that we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then, so throughout that whole process, that's when I decided, hey, I can start to connect the dots between all of the science that I've learned, which was mainly mathematical and applied to machines and electrical circuitry, right? But I can start to take that and connect the dots. And it was actually through some of the friendships that I made on Instagram that I started to notice, oh, wow, some of these people that are clearly very knowledgeable in the biomedical sciences, right? Like biochemistry, physiology, biology. They would start to make physics references, and I would start to understand that. And then there's actually a book out there called The Body Electric, and that's a really great book to read. And I read that book, and that's when I started to realize that the body conducts electricity. We kind of know those things, right? We're taught that, we're taught that
synapses and yeah.
Well, yeah, and I worked in the exactly, and I worked in the electrical industry. So, one of the main objectives in electrical safety is to not get shocked. And the reason that we get shocked is that we become conductors of electricity. We essentially complete the circuit, right?
Oh, wow.
And so anyway, so that's really when it finally just dawned on me, like, hey, I care so much about this. I also, I was working as a project engineer in electrical construction for hospitals. So both spending time in hospitals and really being able to walk wherever I wanted to in a hospital. Not to say that I wandered off into unknowing areas, but, or areas that I shouldn't have been in. I got to see a simultaneously, as I'm learning about my own health, I'm spending a lot of time inside of hospitals, right, to address whatever construction projects that they needed, and not to mention, I hated my job. I completely disliked working in construction as a project engineer, and so all of that led me to trying to find solutions as to, well, what am I going to do for money next, And so that's where I was like, oh well, there's a way to establish like a health coaching practice and really bring a lot of sense into it, bring a lot of science into it. So not just being like a typical health coach, which you don't really know what they know in terms of a scientific approach, and based on the program that they took, they could just be offering some really, really like superficial recommendations. That's when I decided to enroll in a program. And so I enrolled in that program. It took me a little while. So I enrolled in that program at the end of last year. So I'm actually still in it. So I'm not certified yet, but I'm working up to that. So I'm still a corporate employee. I don't work in construction anymore. I actually work in defense. So I have an engineering position working in defense and manufacturing. I work in electronics manufacturing in like quality control, which is very interesting.
That's cool because it allows you to follow your dream, and that you are not worried about having to, pay for your bills. You can now follow your dream in your free time, which is being certified as is it a holistic health coach? What's the exact title?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So absolutely. It's an integrative program. So it's called Integrative Health Practitioner, and it was created by a naturopathic doctor named Dr. Stephen Cabral, and he's got a really great podcast where it's very, very informative, and he's a wealth of knowledge in terms of talking about all topics of health and offering it for free for the most part. And so I will be completing that certification probably within the next couple months. I'm just trying to be very thorough about it, so I'm not
just like it could take you. Is it at your own pace, or is it?
Yeah, and it's all at your own pace. And so, so that's something.
Can you repeat one more time what the title is, or what the coaching title is?
Absolutely. It's called Integrative Health Practitioner. So in the integrative world,
IHP. Okay.
IHP. Yeah. And so in the integrative world, the idea is to integrate all the systems of the body, right? To not only just understand that all of the systems are interconnected, but also integrating the more Eastern philosophies as well. So this is.
I love that.
So yeah, I mean, an ideal doctor, in my opinion, is somebody that, yes, they went through the allopathic training, but then they sought other training outside of that after they completed it. And there are doctors out there that have their functional certifications, or some of them, like Dr. Thomas Cowan he specializes in anthroposophic medicine. So he's an expert on the teachings of Rudolf Steiner. And actually, Rudolf
Sure.
Steiner is the one who created biodynamic farming. He was
I
a
was about to
wealth
say,
of
yeah,
knowledge
I
and
remember
a
that
great
name.
teacher.
Yep.
Yeah, and so, and then there are others that just get functional certifications. And then, of course, you know, you have not just MDs, but like there's a lot of chiropractic doctors, which they go through medical school as well. And then
Sure.
they get functional certifications as well. So that means they study more nutrition, and, you know, they try to assimilate all of the information coming from the different systems of the body in order to provide the best interventions possible.